In the fog-shrouded Redwood forests of Northern California, March 1932, while the rest of America was learning new words like breadline and Hooverville, an 18-year-old girl stood in the doorway of a county orphanage and heard the words that would change everything. The girl is 18. She can fend for herself. The boy goes to the labor camp in Sacramento. They will not see each other again. Evangeline Whitmore did not move. She did not speak. She simply stood there in her worn black dress, the one she had worn to her parents' funeral 3 weeks earlier, and listened as the orphanage director discussed her family's fate as casually as one might discuss the weather. Her brother Callum was 16 years old. He had their father's dark hair and their mother's stubborn jaw. He had spent the last 3 weeks alternating between rage and silence, unable to process a grief too large for his young heart to hold. He did not know that strangers were deciding his future in a cramped office while he sat in a hallway, waiting. Their parents had died on a Tuesday. The logging truck had lost its brakes on Miller's Pass, had sailed over the edge like a bird that forgot how to fly, and had carried Thomas and Mary Whitmore into a ravine so deep that it took 3 days to recover the bodies. Evangeline had identified them. She had insisted, though Sheriff Virgil Boone had tried to spare her. She needed to see. She needed to know it was real. It was real. Now she stood in this orphanage that smelled of bleach and despair, listening to bureaucrats carve up what remained of her family, and something inside her went very still. The Whitmore boy has behavioral issues, the director was saying to her assistant. No one wants to adopt a 16-year-old with a temper. Sacramento will take him. They always need workers. Evangeline knew about Sacramento. Everyone knew. The labor camps there worked boys until they broke, paid them nothing, and called it charity. Boys who went to Sacramento came back as hollowed-out men, if they came back at all. She thought of Callum, her little brother who still slept with their mother's handkerchief under his pillow. Her little brother who had punched a wall so hard he broke his hand the night their parents died, then cried in her arms until dawn. Her little brother who was all she had left in this world. She thought of her father's voice, the last words he had spoken to her before climbing into that truck. Take care of your brother, Evie. You are his anchor, she had promised. That night, Evangeline did not sleep. She lay in the narrow cot assigned to her, listening to the sounds of the orphanage, the creaking floors and crying children and slamming doors, and she planned. At 3 a.m, she rose. She moved through the darkness like a ghost, gathering what she needed. The $23 hidden in the lining of her coat, the money her father had pressed into her hand the morning he died, just in case. The hunting knife he had given her on her 16th birthday, 2 blankets from the supply closet, a box of matches, a canteen. She found Callum in the boys' dormitory, already awake, already watching the door. I knew you would come, he whispered. We are leaving. Now. Where? Away, anywhere but here. They climbed out a bathroom window and dropped into the fog. Copper was waiting for them, the 3-year-old collie mix who had been their father's shadow and was now theirs. He had been tied outside the orphanage, deemed too much trouble to keep inside. He did not bark when he saw them. He simply fell into step beside Evangeline, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. They walked into the redwood forest as the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Behind them, the orphanage slept on, unaware that 2 of its charges had vanished into the wilderness. Ahead of them lay nothing but fog and ancient trees and an uncertain future. But they were together. For now, that was enough. The first 3 days in the forest were a study in misery. They walked until their feet blistered, then walked some more. They ate the bread Evangeline had taken from the orphanage kitchen until it was gone. They slept under fallen logs.
We can't go back. If we stop now, we lose everything.
I don't know how much longer I can keep walking.
And woke covered in dew, shivering so hard their teeth chattered. Callum grew angrier with each passing hour. Where are we going? He demanded on the second day. Do you even have a plan? Evangeline did not answer. She did not have an answer. This is insane, Callum continued, his voice rising. We are going to die out here. We should go back. Go back to what? To a labor camp in Sacramento? To never seeing each other again? At least we would be alive. Would we? Would you be alive in Sacramento, Callum? Or would you just be breathing? He had no response to that. He simply turned away and walked faster, as if he could outpace his own fear. On the third night, Callum punched a tree so hard that his hand split open. Blood ran down his fingers as he stood there, chest heaving, rage and grief pouring out of him in waves. "Why did they have to die?" he shouted at the forest. "Why did they leave us? Wait us!" Evangeline wrapped his hand in strips torn from her petticoat. She did not tell him to be quiet. She did not tell him everything would be fine. She simply held his wounded hand in hers and let him cry. "I miss them," he whispered. "I miss them so much." "I know, I miss them too. What are we going to do, Evie? What are we going to do?" She looked at her brother, this boy who was trying so hard to be a man, and she felt the weight of her promise pressing down on her shoulders. "We are going to survive," she said. "Whatever it takes, we are going to survive." On the fourth day, they ran out of food. Callum developed a fever from sleeping in the damp, his skin hot to the touch, his eyes glassy. Evangeline forced him to keep walking, knowing that if they stopped, they might never start again. By afternoon, she was carrying most of their supplies while Callum stumbled along beside her, barely conscious. Copper walked ahead, then circled back, then walked ahead again, as if trying to lead them somewhere. As the sun began to set, Evangeline allowed herself to consider the possibility that they might actually die out here, that she might have led her brother into the wilderness only to watch him perish, that her attempt to save him might be the thing that killed him. She found a hollow beneath a fallen log and helped Callum inside. He was shivering uncontrollably now, his lips tinged with blue. She wrapped both blankets around him and held him close, trying to share what little warmth she had. "I am sorry," she whispered into the darkness. "I am so sorry." She did not know if she was apologizing to Callum, or to her parents, or to God, or to the universe itself. She only knew that she had failed. She had promised to protect her brother, and she had led him to his death in a forest so vast and indifferent that no one would ever find their bodies. Copper whined and pressed against her side. She buried her face in his fur and allowed herself to cry for the first time since her parents' funeral. She cried until she had no tears left. Until the forest grew dark around her and the stars emerged above the canopy like scattered diamonds. Until exhaustion pulled her down into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to Copper barking, not the lazy woof he used to greet friendly strangers, but the sharp, insistent bark that meant he had found something important. He was standing at the edge of the hollow, his whole body quivering, his nose pointed toward the forest. Evangeline checked on Callum. His fever had broken in the night. His breathing was steady, his color better. Not well, but not dying either. "Stay here," she told him. "I will be back." She followed Copper through the forest, pushing through ferns and climbing over fallen logs, until she emerged into a small valley she had never seen before. And there, standing alone in the center of that valley like a monument to time itself, was the tree. Something about it commanded reverence, as if the forest itself had designated this one as sacred. The other redwoods kept their distance, leaving this giant in a clearing of its own, bathed in the soft morning light that filtered through the canopy above. But it was the base that made her breath catch in her throat. The base of the tree flared outward like the skirts of a giant, bulging and massive, easily 65 feet around. And there, facing east, away from the prevailing winds, was an opening, an archway, a doorway, a threshold into darkness. Evangeline approached slowly, reverently, as one might approach a cathedral. Copper walked beside her, his earlier urgency replaced by a quiet alertness. The opening was perhaps 5 feet wide and 7 feet tall, just large enough for a person to walk through without ducking, just large enough to feel intentional, as if the tree had created this space on purpose. She stepped inside. The hollow was larger than she had expected. Much larger. The interior stretched roughly 18 feet across, a circular space with walls of smooth reddish wood curving upward into darkness. The floor was soft with centuries of accumulated debris, dry and springy beneath her feet like the finest carpet. She looked up and saw, far above her head, small openings where light filtered through, natural windows that would
It's a tree. Are you sure it's safe?
It's safer than the world outside right now.
brighten the space during the day, natural ventilation that would keep the air fresh. She reached out and touched the wall. The wood was smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. She could almost feel the tree breathing, could almost sense the slow pulse of sap moving through its ancient veins. The tree was not dead, it was not even dying. Some ancient injury, a lightning strike or a fire had hollowed out the heartwood while leaving the living sapwood intact. The tree had simply adapted, had continued growing around its wound, had transformed its injury into something new, into something that could be a home. Evangeline stood in the center of that space for a long time, feeling the presence of the ancient tree around her. She thought of her grandfather, her mother's father, who had come to America from Cornwall with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge in his head. He had told her stories as a child, stories about people who lived in caves and hollow trees, who survived winters that should have killed them by learning to work with nature instead of against it. When you have nothing, he used to say, look for what is already there waiting to be found. She had found it. This will be our home, she said aloud, and the words echoed in the hollow like a promise. Getting Callum to the tree took most of the morning. He was weak from the fever, barely able to walk, and the distance that Copper had covered in minutes took them hours to traverse. But eventually they stood together at the entrance to the hollow, Callum leaning heavily on Evangeline's shoulder, staring at the space that would become their world. A tree, he said flatly. You want us to live in a tree. I want us to live, period. This tree can help us do that. We will be like animals. We will be alive. We will be together, everything else we can figure out. Callum was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped inside, his hand trailing along the smooth wood of the wall, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. It is dry, he said, surprised. Yes. And warm, warmer than outside. Yes. He turned to look at her, and for the first time since their parents died, something other than anger flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been hope. How do we start? Evangeline smiled. We start with the floor. The first 2 weeks were the hardest work either of them had ever done. They gathered flat stones from the creek half a mile away, carrying them one by one, two by two, until their arms ached and their backs screamed. They laid them carefully across the areas where they would walk most, filling the gaps with clay dug from the creek bank, creating a surface that was level and solid and clean. Callum, who had learned carpentry from their father, built frames to hold the stones in place. His hands moved with a confidence that surprised Evangeline, a skill she had not known he possessed emerging now that he had something to build instead of destroy. They gathered moss and dried grass and wove them into mats that they hung against the walls, creating a layer of insulation between themselves and the cool wood. They left gaps where the wood was most beautiful, treating those sections like windows that looked out onto nothing but the ancient heart of the tree. They built a cooking area outside the entrance, a fire pit ringed with stones positioned so the smoke would rise away from the hollow. A lean-to of branches and bark gave them shelter while cooking in the rain. A system of trenches directed water away from the entrance and down the slope. Copper appointed himself guardian of the threshold, lying across the entrance each night, alert to every sound in the forest. He seemed to understand that this was home now, that his job was to protect it. By the end of the second week, the hollow had been transformed. It was not comfortable, not yet, but it was dry and it was safe and it was theirs. Evangeline stood in the entrance as the sun set, watching the light fade from the forest, feeling something she had not felt since her parents died. Pride, accomplishment, the first faint stirrings of peace. They had built something. They had survived. And they were just getting started. It was Callum who found the wanted poster. He had ventured close to the logging road to scout for useful materials, old nails and discarded rope, and the 100 small things that made survival possible when he saw it tacked to a tree. Wanted, Evangeline Whitmore, 18 years old, suspected of kidnapping. Minor Callum Whitmore, 16 years old. Contact Sheriff Virgil Boone, Humboldt County. He tore it down and ran back to the tree, his face white, his hands shaking. They say you kidnapped me, he said, holding out the crumpled paper. They say you are a criminal. Evangeline read the poster slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. If they find us, she said quietly, they will take you to Sacramento and put me in jail. We will never see each other again. What do? We stay hidden. No one can know we are here. No one. She looked at her brother, at this boy who had become her whole world, and she made another promise. Not aloud this time, but in her heart, where it mattered most. They would not take him, no matter what. They would not take him from her. Whatever it took, she would keep him safe. If you are watching this and you have ever had to protect someone you love against impossible odds, you know what Evangeline was feeling in that moment. That fierce determination, that absolute refusal to let go. Drop a comment and tell me about a time when you had to fight for your family. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the time, because what happens next will stay with you long after this video ends. The first outsider found them in late April. Hosea Brennan was the foreman of the Humboldt Logging Company, a weathered man of 50 with hands like oak roots and eyes that had seen everything the forest could throw at a person. He had noticed smoke rising from a valley that should have been uninhabited, and being a man who did not like mysteries, he had come to investigate. He found Evangeline teaching Callum how to clean a rabbit, their hands bloody, their face intent on the work. Copper saw him first and embarked a warning. But Evangeline simply looked up, wiped her hands on her apron, and asked if he would like some tea. Hosea Brennan would later say that the moment he stepped inside that hollow tree was the moment everything he thought he knew about the Whitmore orphans changed. He had expected desperation. He had expected squalor. He had expected 2 children on the edge of starvation, waiting to be rescued from their own foolishness. Instead, he found a home. The floor was solid stone, the walls hung with insulating mats, the sleeping areas neatly arranged with beds raised off the ground on wooden frames. A shelf carved into the soft inner wood held jars of preserved food. A small but efficient fireplace vented
Do you think they'll find us?
Not if we stay quiet. Not if we build this right.
through a natural chimney above. Everything was clean, organized, functional. 2 children had built this, an 18-year-old girl and her 16-year-old brother, with nothing but their hands and their determination in the ancient tree that had given them shelter. "Who taught you to do this?" Hosea asked. "Our grandfather," Evangeline said, "in necessity. The sheriff is looking for you, says you kidnapped your brother." "I did not kidnap him. I saved him. They wanted to send him to a labor camp in Sacramento. They wanted to separate us. I am 18 years old. I am a legal adult. I have every right to care for my own brother." Hosea was silent for a long moment. He thought of his own children, grown now and scattered across the country. He thought of what he would have done at 18 if someone had tried to take his siblings away. "I will not tell anyone," he said finally, "but I cannot stop others from finding you." He left a sack of flour and salt at the entrance before he walked away. He did not look back. But word spread, as word always does in small communities bound together by hardship and the need for something to talk about. By May, half the logging camp had heard about the orphan girl living in a tree. By June, they had come to see for themselves. The first to arrive with judgment in his heart was Sheriff Virgil Boone. He came with 2 deputies, his badge polished bright, his hand resting on his holster as if he expected resistance. He found Evangeline sitting at the entrance to the hollow, mending a pair of trousers, looking for all the world like a woman at peace. "Evangeline Whitmore," he announced, "you are wanted for the kidnapping of a minor." Evangeline did not stand. She did not stop sewing. She simply looked up at him with those calm gray eyes and said, "I am 18 years old, Sheriff. Under California law, I am a legal adult. My brother is 16. I have taken responsibility for his care. There is no kidnapping. There is only a sister protecting her brother. You have no home, no income, no means of support. You are not fit to be anyone's guardian. I have a home." She gestured at the tree behind her. "I have food. I have shelter. I have kept my brother alive and healthy for 2 months in conditions that would have broken most men. What more do you require?" Sheriff Boone looked at the hollow tree with unconcealed disgust. He looked at the stone floor and the insulated walls and the shelf of preserved food. He looked at Callum, who had emerged from inside and now stood beside his sister. His jaw set, his fists clenched. He saw 2 children who had built something remarkable out of nothing. But he did not see that as remarkable. He saw it as an affront to the proper order of things. I give them until first snow, he said to his deputies, loud enough for Evangeline to hear. County will be picking up 2 frozen corpses. He turned and walked away. Evangeline watched him go. Then she picked up her mending and continued where she had left off. He is wrong, Callum said. I know. We will prove him wrong. Yes, we will. Next came Dr. Howard Ashford, the town physician, a man who believed that education conferred wisdom and that the poor were poor because they lacked the intelligence to be otherwise. He arrived with a black bag and a condescending smile, claiming he had come to check on the children's health. What he really came to do was confirm his suspicion that they were living in squalor, so he could report them to the county and have them removed by force. What he found instead left him speechless. Living in a tree, he managed finally. This is medically insane. The dampness alone will give you pneumonia. The lack of proper sanitation will breed disease. You cannot possibly survive here. We have survived here for 2 months, Evangeline said. My brother and I are both in perfect health. The interior of this tree is drier than most cabins in the logging camp. The temperature stays constant. The air circulates naturally. This is not insanity, Doctor. This is adaptation. Dr. Ashford looked around with barely concealed revulsion. He did not touch the walls. He did not examine the ventilation system. He did not acknowledge the clean floors or the organized supplies or the obvious health of the 2 young people standing before him. When you get sick, he said, and you will, do not come crying to me. He left without offering any actual medical care. Reverend James Whitfield came next, armed with scripture and righteous certainty. Living inside a tree like pagans, he declared, standing at the entrance as if afraid to contaminate himself by stepping inside. Like savages, your parents would be ashamed. Callum, who had been silent through the visits of the sheriff and the doctor, finally spoke. Our parents would be proud, he said, his voice steady. They would be proud that we survived. They would be proud that we stayed together. They would be proud that we did not give up when everyone told us to. The Lord provides proper shelter for his children. Houses, churches, not this abomination. Evangeline stepped forward, and something in her eyes made the Reverend take a step back. This tree has been standing for 2,000 years, she said quietly. It was here before your church, before your town, before your country. Perhaps God built this shelter long before any of us arrived. Perhaps he knew someone would need it someday. Reverend Whitfield opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He turned and walked away, his Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. God will judge those who live like beasts, he called over his shoulder. Perhaps he will, Evangeline replied, but I suspect he will also judge those who turned away from children in need. The worst among the skeptics was Cornelius Hartwell. He owned the general store, a man who prided himself on his business acumen and his certainty that the world worked exactly as he believed it did. He had lived in Humboldt County for 40 years. He had seen harsh winters and hard times. He knew with the absolute confidence of a man who had never been truly tested that 2 children could not survive in a hollow tree. He did not come to the tree himself at first. He was too respectable for that. But he talked, loudly and often, to anyone who would listen. Those orphans will be dead by Christmas, he declared at the general store, where his words carried weight. Mark my words. The first real storm will flood that hollow, or the tree will fall, or they will freeze to death in their sleep. The county will be picking up corpses before New Year. He bet money on it. $5 that the Whitmore children would not survive until spring. Several men took that bet, not because they believed he was wrong, but because they hoped he was. Dolores Haggerty spread rumors with the enthusiasm of someone who had found her true calling in life. She was the wife of the assistant foreman, a woman who had never been important in her own right, and who compensated by making herself essential to the flow of gossip in the community. Those poor orphans, she told anyone who would listen. That girl is clearly disturbed, dragging her little brother into the wilderness like that. Someone should call the authorities. Someone should do something. I heard she talks to herself. And that dog, probably rabid. It is only a matter of time before something terrible happens. Mark my words. The rumors grew with each telling. Evangeline was crazy. Evangeline was dangerous. Evangeline had driven her parents to their deaths. Evangeline was practicing witchcraft in that tree. Evangeline was not fit to care for a dog, let alone a child. None of it was true. All of it was believed. And then there was Jedediah Crandall. Jed was 19 years old, the son of a logger who had worked alongside Thomas Whitmore before the accident. He was handsome in the careless way of young men who had never faced real hardship, and cruel in the casual way of those who had never been held accountable for their cruelty. He came to the tree with a group of friends, laughing and shouting, treating the visit like entertainment. "Hey, tree girl," he called out. "You and your brother playing house in there? Got a tea party going? Maybe some..."
If we help them, they'll know we're here.
If we don't help them, they won't survive the night.
"Imaginary friends?" His friends laughed. Jed picked up a stone and threw it at the tree, hitting the bark just above the entrance. Copper burst out barking, positioning himself between the intruders and the hollow. Callum emerged a moment later, his fists clenched, his face dark with fury. "Get out of here," he said. "Or what? You will make me? You and your crazy sister and your mangy dog?" Jed threw another stone. This one hit Copper on the shoulder. The dog yelped and retreated, but did not stop barking. Callum started forward, but Evangeline caught his arm. "Do not," she said quietly. "That is what they want. They want us to react. They want to prove we are the savages they say we are. I am not going to let them hurt Copper. And you will not, but we will not give them the satisfaction of seeing us lose control." She stepped out of the hollow and faced Jed directly. She did not raise her voice. She did not show fear. She simply looked at him with those calm gray eyes until his smile faltered. "You can throw stones," she said. "You can call us names. You can come here every day and try to break us. But we will still be here tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. We are not going anywhere." Jed opened his mouth to respond, but something in her gaze stopped him. $5 says you do not last till August," he said finally, trying to recover his bravado. "Any takers?" He turned and walked away, his friends following. Not everyone who came to the tree came with judgment. Some came with kindness. Old Pete Lindquist appeared on a morning in June, sitting at the entrance to the hollow, as if he had always been there, stroking Copper's ears while the dog's tail wagged contentedly. He was 70 years old, a Swedish immigrant who had lived alone in the forest for 40 years. His English was accented but precise, his hands gnarled but steady, his eyes the pale blue of a winter sky. "I have been watching you," he said, "for weeks now. You build good, but not good enough for winter here." Evangeline studied him carefully. He did not seem threatening. He did not seem to want anything from them. He simply seemed to be stating a fact. "What do you mean?" "This forest, she is beautiful, but she is not kind. Winter here will kill you if you are not ready. You need better insulation, better heating, better food storage. I can show you." "Why would you help us?" Pete was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Because I was you once, 14 years old, ran away from orphanage in Stockholm, lived in forest for 40 years. Nobody helped me. I figure out myself. Took long time, lost fingers to frostbite." He held up his hands, showing the stumps where 2 fingers should have been. "You do not have to lose fingers. I can teach you what I learned." And he did. Over the following months, Pete taught them everything he knew about surviving the Redwood winters. He showed them how to build a small fireplace inside the tree using stones arranged in a specific pattern that would absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night. He called it thermal mass. "Stone holds heat," he explained. 6 big stones around fire. They stay warm 8 hours after fire goes out. Tree holds heat too. Living wood is insulator. You are living in the biggest insulator in forest. He taught them to add layers to their walls. Bark over moss over the existing mats, creating air pockets that trapped warmth. Air that does not move is best insulator God makes. Better than wood. Better than stone. You trap air between layers. You stay warm when world outside is dying. He showed them how to dig a root cellar beneath the tree, below the frost line, where the temperature stayed constant year-round. Earth is always 55 degrees at 3 feet deep. Does not matter if it is summer or winter. You store food there, it keeps all year. Callum absorbed these lessons eagerly. He had their father's gift for building, for understanding how things fit together. Under Pete's guidance, he transformed from an angry boy into something new. A builder, a provider, a young man with purpose. Opal Sutridge came in secret after dark, carrying baskets of seeds and jars of preserved vegetables and recipes written in her careful hand. She was 65 years old, a widow whose husband had died in a mine collapse in 1918. She had spent the years since then living on the margins of the logging community, tolerated but not welcomed, too old to be useful and too stubborn to die. I remember when I was young, she told Evangeline. In Cornwall, where I grew up, my grandparents lived in a cave through one winter when their cottage burned. They survived. They raised 5 children in that cave before they could afford to build again. You are not crazy, child. You are doing what people have always done. You are surviving. She brought them seeds for vegetables that would grow in the filtered light of the forest, lettuce and spinach and root crops that did not need full sun. She taught Evangeline how to preserve food in salt and smoke, how to dry berries and nuts for the lean months, how to recognize the wild plants that could supplement their diet. Round things last, she said once, looking at the curved walls of the hollow. Square things break. This tree is round. It will stand when other structures fall. Opal returned every week through the summer and fall, always after dark, always with something useful. Seeds one week, preserved vegetables the next, recipes written in her careful hand, knowledge passed down from her Cornish grandmother about surviving hard winters. She taught Evangeline how to read the weather by watching smoke rise from a fire. She taught Callum how to predict frost by the behavior of spiders. She shared secrets that no book contained, wisdom earned through generations of struggle and survival. My grandmother lived through the famine in Cornwall, she told them one evening. She always said that knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you. She gave hers to my mother, and my mother gave it to me. Now I give it to you. She looked at Evangeline with eyes that held decades of sorrow and strength. Use it well. Pass it on. That is how we survive, not alone, but together, across the generations. In August, disaster nearly struck. Callum had grown restless. Months of hiding in the forest had worn on him, and he convinced himself that a quick trip to town for salt and nails would be safe. He disguised himself with an old hat pulled low, traded rabbit pelts at the general store, and was leaving when he heard a voice behind him. That is the Whitmore boy. Jedediah Crandall stood in the doorway, pointing directly at him. Callum ran. He ran through the back alleys, over fences, into the forest. Behind him he heard shouting. Heard Sheriff Boone's voice calling for deputies. Heard the thunder of boots on wooden boardwalks. He did not stop running until his lung burned and his legs gave out. He collapsed behind a fallen redwood, gasping for air, certain that at any moment a hand would grab his shoulder and drag him back to everything he had escaped. But the footsteps faded. The voices grew distant. The forest swallowed him whole. He found his way back to the tree when his darkness fell, shaking so badly he could barely walk. Evangeline was waiting at the entrance, her face white with fear. Where were you? I thought they almost caught me. His voice cracked. Jed saw me. The sheriff came. I barely got away. Evangeline pulled him inside and held him while he shook. She did not scold him. She did not say, I told you so. She simply held her brother and thanked God that he was safe. That night, she made a decision. No one leaves the forest until this is over, she said. Not for any reason. We have everything we need here. We do not need anything from that town. Callum nodded. He had learned his lesson. Some risks were not worth taking. Opal Sutridge, who heard about the near capture through the gossip network, began bringing supplies to the tree herself, making the dangerous journey so the children would not have to. You stay hidden, she told Evangeline. I am an old woman. Nobody pays attention to old women. Let me help. If this story is touching your heart, if you know what it feels like to have someone risk themselves to help you, stay with me. Because the storm that is coming will test everything these young people have built. And what happens next is something you will never forget. By October, the hollow had been transformed into something remarkable. The fireplace worked perfectly, the thermal mass keeping the interior warm long after the flames died down. The walls were triple insulated now, so effective that Evangeline could work in her shirt sleeves while frost formed on the ferns outside. The root cellar was full of preserved food, enough to last them through 6 months of winter if necessary. Callum had built a proper door, 4 inches of solid wood hung on leather hinges, capable of sealing the entrance completely against wind and rain and snow. He had built shelves along every available surface, maximizing storage in the limited space. He had built beds raised high off the ground, insulated from below with dried ferns, covered with the deer hides they had accumulated from his increasingly successful hunting. Copper had grown fat and content, his coat thick and glossy, his loyalty to the Whitmore children absolute. And Evangeline had grown too, not taller but stronger, not older but wiser. The frightened girl who had fled the orphanage 6 months ago was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built a home from nothing, who had kept her family alive against all odds. The first test came in November. A cold snap swept down from Alaska, dropping temperatures to 25 degrees, bringing winds that howled through the forest. In the logging camp, families huddled around their stoves, burning through their wood supplies, waking each morning to frost on the inside of their windows. In the tree, Evangeline read a book while Callum repaired a trap. The fire crackled softly in its stone hearth. Copper sprawled before it, twitching in his sleep. The interior temperature held steady at 58 degrees. Hosea Brennan came to check on them, wrapped in every coat he owned, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air.
They said we wouldn't make it.
They were wrong. We built something that lasts.
He stepped inside the hollow and stopped, stunned by the warmth that wrapped around him like an embrace. How? He asked. Evangeline explained the thermal mass, the triple insulation, the way the living wood of the tree itself acted as a buffer against the cold. Hosea listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to wonder. "It is warmer in here than my cabin," he said. "I have a proper stove. I burn wood all day, and it is still colder than this." "The tree does most of the work," Evangeline said. "We just had to learn how to help it." The skeptics remained unconvinced. "One cold snap proves nothing," Cornelius Hartwell declared at the general store. "Wait until the real winter comes. Wait until the blizzards. Then we will see." Sheriff Virgil Boone nodded his agreement. They have been lucky so far. Luck runs out. In early December, old Pete Lindquist appeared at the tree before dawn, his face grave. He did not greet them. He simply stood at the entrance, looking at the sky, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "What is wrong?" Evangeline asked. "Everything." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. "I live in this forest 40 years, he said slowly. "I learned to read her moods, the birds, the bears, the way the air feels on the skin. She speaks to those who listen." He paused. "She is screaming now." He told them what he had observed. The birds had migrated 3 weeks early. The bears had denned in October instead of November. The squirrels had gathered twice their normal stores. The elk had moved to lower elevations before Thanksgiving. "I see these signs only one time before," he said. "Winter of 1888. I was 30 years old, new to this country, did not understand what the signs meant." "What happened?" "Storm came. 9 days. Killed 43 people in Humboldt County alone. Killed hundreds across California. They called it the Great White Hurricane." He looked at the hollow tree, at the walls they had built, at the systems they had created. "What comes now will be worse. The signs are stronger. The animals are more afraid. You must prepare like your lives depend on it." He paused. "Because they do." They spent the next 2 weeks preparing with a desperation that bordered on frenzy. They doubled their wood supply, then doubled it again. They reinforced the door with additional bracing. They dug new drainage trenches, deeper and wider than before. They stockpiled water inside the hollow in sealed containers. They checked and rechecked every system they had built. On December 22nd, the sky turned a strange yellowish color, and the air pressure began to drop. The forest went silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, just an ominous stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. Evangeline stood at the entrance to the hollow, watching the unnatural sky, feeling the weight of what was coming, pressing down on her. "It is here," she said. She pulled the heavy wooden door closed and sealed it tight. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall. The storm began on December 23rd, 1932, And it did not stop for 9 days. It started like any winter storm, snow falling steadily through the morning, wind picking up by noon, visibility dropping through the afternoon. By evening, the forest had disappeared behind a wall of white, and the sound of the wind had become a constant roar. But this storm was different. This storm had no intention of stopping. By the second day, the snow was 2 feet deep and still falling. The wind gusts reached 60 miles per hour, snapping branches from trees, driving the snow horizontally through the air. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees below zero. By the third day, the snow was 3 feet deep. The wind gusts reached 70 miles per hour. The temperature dropped to 25 below. By the fourth day, people started dying. In the logging camp, chaos reigned. The first casualty was the general store. Cornelius Hartwell had built it with green lumber to save money, and the frozen wood contracted in the cold, opening gaps between the boards that let the wind howl through. On the second night, the roof gave way under the weight of the accumulated snow. Hartwell and his wife and 10-year-old daughter Emma barely escaped before the entire structure collapsed. They huddled in a neighbor's cabin, wrapped in wet blankets, watching their life's work reduced to kindling. The neighbor's cabin was already overcrowded, already running low on firewood, already cold despite the stove burning at full capacity. Jedediah Crandall's family cabin collapsed on the third day. A support beam, weakened by rot, finally gave way. Jed's leg was trapped under falling debris. His parents dragged him out and carried him to another cabin, but the leg was badly broken. Dr. Ashford's chimney became blocked with ice on the fourth day. Smoke filled the house, and the family had to choose between suffocation and exposure. They opened the windows to let the smoke out, and the temperature inside dropped to 20 degrees. The church roof collapsed on the fifth day under the weight of 4 feet of snow. Reverend Whitfield had opened the building as a shelter for families whose homes had failed. 12 people were inside when it happened. They escaped into the storm, scrambling through snow up to their waists. 3 people were injured. One child went missing for 2 hours before being found, unconscious from hypothermia, half buried in a snowdrift. And in the hollow tree, 2 miles away, Evangeline and Callum played cards by candlelight. The storm raged outside. They could hear it, a constant howling that went on day and night. They could feel the tree sway slightly in the strongest gusts, a gentle rocking that was almost soothing. But inside their walls of living wood, they were safe. The temperature held steady at 56 degrees. The thermal mass stones radiated heat long after the fire burned low. The triple insulated walls kept the cold at bay. The heavy door blocked the wind completely. They had food enough for months. They had water in sealed containers. They had Copper, who slept by the fire and occasionally lifted his head to listen to the storm before settling back down with a contented sigh. They had each other. On the fifth day, Callum looked up from his cards and said, "Do you think anyone in the camp is okay?" Evangeline had been wondering the same thing. She had been imagining the thin-walled cabins, the inadequate insulation, the families who had mocked her now struggling to survive. "I do not know," she said. "I hope so." "Should we do something? Try to help?" "We cannot even open the door. The snow is probably piled against it 3 feet high, and even if we could get out, we would die trying to reach them. The wind would kill us in minutes." Callum nodded slowly. He knew she was right. "When the storm ends," he said, "we help them, right?" Evangeline looked at her brother, at this young man who was thinking about helping the people who had wanted him sent to a labor camp. "Yes," she said, "when the storm ends, we help them." On the sixth day, someone knocked on the door. At first, Evangeline thought she had imagined it. The storm was so loud, the wind so constant, that it seemed impossible any other sound could penetrate. But Copper lifted his head, his ears pricked forward, and let out a low whine. The knock came again, weak, desperate, barely audible over the howling wind. Evangeline and Callum looked at each other. Then together they began to dig out the door. It took 20 minutes to clear enough snow to crack it open. Cold air rushed in, shockingly brutal after the warmth of the hollow, and with it came a voice. "Please, my daughter. Please." Cornelius Hartwell stood in the snow, his face white with frostbite, his body shaking uncontrollably. In his arms he carried Emma, 10 years old, unconscious, her lips blue and her skin the color of old paper. Behind him, barely visible through the driving snow, was his wife. She was crawling. She had no more strength to walk. Evangeline did not hesitate. She did not think about all the times Cornelius had said she would die, all the times he had predicted the county would be picking up frozen corpses. She saw a father trying to save his daughter. She saw a mother who had walked 2 miles through a blizzard. She saw human beings in desperate need of shelter. "Come in," she said, "quickly, before you freeze." Emma Hartwell was dying. Her skin was gray. Her breathing was shallow. Her body temperature had dropped so low that she no longer shivered, which Evangeline knew was the most dangerous sign of all. "We need to warm her slowly," Evangeline said, remembering what Pete had taught her. Too fast and her heart could stop. She wrapped Emma in blankets that had been warming by the fire. She placed heated stones wrapped in cloth at her feet and under her arms. She held the girl's hands in her own, sharing her warmth through touch. Cornelius watched, helpless, as this girl he had called crazy worked to save his daughter's life. An hour passed, 2 hours, 3, and then Emma opened her eyes. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You are safe," Evangeline said. "You are warm. You are going to be okay." Emma looked around at the curved wooden walls, at the soft candlelight, at the stone fireplace radiating gentle heat. She looked at Copper, who had positioned himself at her feet like a furry guardian. "Can I pet the dog?" she asked. Evangeline laughed, the first real laugh she had allowed herself in days. "Yes," she said, "you can pet the dog." If you have ever held someone's life in your hands, if you have ever watched someone come back from the edge of death, you know what Evangeline felt in that moment. That overwhelming relief, that gratitude for every breath. Stay with me, because the storm is not over yet, and what happens next will change everything. The next 2 days brought more survivors. They came alone and in groups, stumbling through the snow, following the smoke that rose from Evangeline's cooking fire, seeking the shelter that so many of them had mocked and dismissed. Jedediah Crandall came, carried on a makeshift stretcher by his father, his broken legs splinted with boards from their collapsed cabin. His mother followed, half frozen, barely conscious. Dr. Ashford came with his wife and children, his medical bag clutched to his chest, his face red with cold and something that might have been shame. Hosea Brennan came with his wife Edith, bringing what supplies they had managed to salvage. Opal Sutridge came, having seen the signs Pete described, and packed her bag 3 days before the first snowflake fell. "I knew where safety was," she said simply. "I helped build it." 5 other families came until the hollow that had sheltered 2 contained 27 souls and 1 very patient dog. It should have been chaos. 27 people in a space 18 feet across, with limited food, limited water, limited air. It should have been a disaster. Instead, it was something like a miracle. Evangeline organized everything. She divided the food into rations, enough for everyone to eat twice a day. She assigned sleeping areas, rotating people in shifts so everyone could rest. She managed the fire, keeping it hot enough to warm the space but not so hot that it consumed their wood supply. Callum became her lieutenant. He repaired equipment, kept the door clear of snow, maintained the ventilation system that kept the air breathable. Copper became a source of comfort for the children. He let them pet him, curl up against him, bury their faces in his fur when they were scared. On the 7th night, they all sat together in the warm orange glow of the fire. 27 people who had been scattered across a logging camp, divided by economics and social standing and petty grievances, now pressed together in a hollow tree, sharing warmth and food and hope. A baby was crying, 6 months old, the child of a logging family, cold despite all the blankets wrapped around him. His mother rocked him desperately, but the crying continued. Cornelius Hartwell, who had not spoken since arriving, slowly removed his coat. It was his only coat, the only protection he had against the cold. He handed it to the mother. "For the baby," he said. She wrapped the coat around her child. The crying stopped. The baby slept. Cornelius sat in his shirt sleeves, shivering, but he did not ask for the coat back. Evangeline saw it. She moved quietly to sit beside him and shared her blanket without a word. They did not speak. They did not need to. On the 9th day, the storm ended. It did not taper off gradually. Wowing. It simply stopped. One moment the wind was howling, the snow was flying, the world was chaos. The next moment there was silence. Evangeline opened the door to a transformed world. The snow reached her chest. The forest was unrecognizable, buried under white, trees bent and broken. The sky was clear and blue and impossibly bright. She stepped outside and felt the cold bite at her skin. 40 degrees below zero, cold enough to kill in minutes, but the sun was shining. The storm was over. They had survived. 27 people emerged from the hollow tree into the sparkling winter morning. They stood blinking in the sunlight, breathing air that tasted of ice and renewal, looking at each other as if seeing one another for the first time. They had gone into that tree as strangers, divided by social class and petty judgments. They emerged as something different, something bound together by shared survival. Cornelius Hartwell looked at Evangeline for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I said the county would pick up your frozen corpses. I called you crazy. I wanted you arrested. He paused, and when he continued, his voice cracked. I was wrong. We were all wrong. You built the only thing in this valley that could save us. You and your brother. Children. You did what none of us could do. He looked down at his daughter Emma, who stood beside him, holding his hand, alive because of the tree he had mocked. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows what you did here. Evangeline did not know what to say. She had not done any of it for recognition. I did not do it alone, she said finally. Callum built as much as I did. Copper kept us company. Pete taught us what we needed to know. Opal brought us seeds and hope. None of us survive alone. We survive together. The aftermath of the storm revealed the true extent of the devastation. 4 cabins in the logging camp had collapsed completely. 8 more were damaged beyond habitation. 67 cattle and horses had frozen to death. 3 people had perished across the county. The tree had not suffered a single scratch. In the weeks that followed, the skeptics came to make their amends. Sheriff Virgil Boone arrived at the tree a week after the storm. He came alone, without deputies, without the authority he had wielded so readily before. Miss Whitmore, he said, I owe you an apology. He removed his hat. I have destroyed your file. The wanted poster, the kidnapping allegation, all of it. As far as Humboldt County is concerned, you are simply a legal adult caring for her minor brother, which is what you were all along. He paused as if the next words cost him something. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about this place. I thought I knew what was possible, and you showed me I did not know anything at all. Dr. Ashford's apology came differently. He arrived with notebooks and measuring instruments, asking permission to study the hollow tree scientifically. He measured the temperature differential between inside and outside. He documented the insulation methods. He drew diagrams of the thermal mass heating system. The principles you used, he told Evangeline, are the same ones in European medical journals. They call it passive heating. I dismissed it as old-fashioned folklore. I was wrong. Will you write about it? I will do more than write about it. I will teach it. What you figured out in months could save lives for decades. Reverend Whitfield delivered his apology from the pulpit. His church was gone, destroyed by the storm, so he held services outdoors that first Sunday after the blizzard. The congregation gathered in the cold, breath rising in clouds as they listened. I called the Whitmore home an abomination, he said. I said that God did not bless those who lived as they lived. He paused, looking out at faces of people who were only alive because of that hollow tree. I was wrong. I have spent this week reading my Bible with new eyes. And do you know what I found? I found that Jesus was born in a stable. I found that the Israelites lived in tents for 40 years. I found that shelter is not about walls and roofs. Shelter is about love, about sacrifice, about opening your door to those in need. Evangeline Whitmore built a shelter with all of those things, and that shelter saved us. Jedediah Crandall came last of all. He limped up to the tree, his legs still healing from his injuries. He found Callum outside, splitting firewood, and stood there for a moment in awkward silence. I bet $5 you would not last until August, Jed said finally. I was an ass. Callum stopped splitting and looked at the young man who had mocked them, who had thrown stones. Keep the $5, Jed continued. Teach me how you built that door instead, the one that held against the wind. My family's door blew open on the second night. That is how the coal got in. Callum considered this for a long moment. Then he set down his axe and held out his hand. Deal. They shook on it, and something that might have been the beginning of friendship passed between them. The following spring brought more visitors, but these came seeking knowledge rather than spectacle. 6 families asked Evangeline to teach them what she knew. She taught them about thermal mass and insulation, about drainage and ventilation. Callum demonstrated building techniques. Copper supervised everything with the dignity of a foreman. By summer, 4 new structures had been built in the valley using the principles Evangeline had developed. You should charge for this, Hosea told her. My grandfather did not charge me, Evangeline replied. Pete did not charge me. Opal did not charge me. This knowledge was given freely. I will give it freely in return. Old Pete Lindquist passed away in March of 1934, as quietly as he had lived. They found him in his cabin, sitting in his chair by the fire, a book open in his lap. He had died in his sleep, peacefully, after 70 years of a life harder than most could imagine. Evangeline and Callum buried him beneath a pine tree he had loved, on a hillside overlooking the valley. They marked the grave with a stone carved with the Swedish words he had once translated for them. Here lies a man who learned from the forest and taught what he learned. Before he died, Pete had given Evangeline his notebooks, 40 years of observations, techniques, and hard-won wisdom. She added them to her own growing collection, a library of survival that would outlast them all. In 1934, Callum turned 18. The day passed without fanfare. There was no one left who cared whether he was a minor or an adult. He was simply Callum Whitmore, a young man of 18, skilled builder and hunter, brother to Evangeline, guardian of the hollow tree. You could leave now, Evangeline told him. Go to a city, find work, live a different life. Callum looked around at the tree that had been his home for 2 years, at the walls he had helped build, at the life they had created from nothing. This is my life, he said. Why would I leave? He did not leave. Not then, not ever. But his role expanded. He opened a small woodworking shop in town, building furniture with the skills he had developed in the forest. He taught young men the techniques Pete had taught him. He became a respected member of the community that had once wanted to send him to a labor camp. And every evening he returned to the hollow tree, where his sister waited with dinner and conversation in the quiet companionship of copper by the fire. Evangeline met Silas Mercer in 1938. He was a forest ranger sent to survey the Redwood groves for a conservation program. He had heard stories about the hollow tree and the woman who lived in it, and like everyone who heard those stories, he did not quite believe them. Then he met Evangeline, and everything changed. She was 24 years old, no longer the desperate girl who had fled an orphanage, but a woman of quiet strength and remarkable knowledge. She showed him the tree, explained its history, demonstrated the systems she had built over 6 years. Silas was fascinated, not just by the tree, but by the woman who had made it her home. He came back the next day and the day after, and the day after that. He asked questions from genuine curiosity. He listened when she spoke. He saw her not as a curiosity, but as a person. They married in the spring of 1940 in a small ceremony held outside the hollow tree. Reverend Whitfield officiated. Cornelius Hartwell gave a speech. Opal Suttridge cried happy tears. Copper wore a ribbon around his collar. Silas built a small cabin near the tree, and they divided their time between the 2 structures. But Evangeline never truly left the hollow. It remained her sanctuary, her workshop, her connection to everything she had survived. Copper died in 1940, the same year Evangeline married. He was 11 years old, ancient for a dog, and he passed peacefully in his sleep one October night, curled up in his favorite spot by the entrance to the hollow tree. He had spent his last day as he had spent all his days since that night they fled the orphanage, watching over the family he loved. They buried him just outside the entrance, in the spot where he had stood guard for 8 years. Callum carved a stone marker with simple words. Copper, he kept us safe. For weeks afterward, Evangeline found herself looking for him, listening for his bark. The hollow tree felt emptier without him, but his memory remained. In the worn spot by the door where he used to sleep, in the stories they told about his loyalty, in the way they remembered to be grateful for every creature who had helped them survive. The years passed, bringing change and growth and the steady accumulation of a life well lived. Evangeline and Silas had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, all of whom grew up knowing the story of the hollow tree. They played inside its walls as children, learned its lessons as they grew, carried its wisdom when they left to build their own lives. Callum never married, but he became an uncle to Evangeline's children and a mentor to countless young people. His woodworking shop grew into a small business, employing half a dozen workers who learned from his methods. The hollow tree remained. Through decades of weather and change, it stood as it had always stood, a monument to endurance and the power of nature to shelter those who treated it with respect. In 1955, the tree was nominated to become a California historical landmark. The nomination was championed by Cornelius Hartwell, now 80 years old, who had spent the last 23 years making good on his promise to tell everyone about what Evangeline had built. This tree, he wrote, is not just a historical curiosity, it is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. It is proof that shelter is not about materials or construction methods. It is about understanding the world around you and working with it, not against it. The nomination was approved. A plaque was installed at the base of the tree. Visitors came from across California and beyond, drawn by the tale of the orphan girl who had made a home inside a giant. Evangeline welcomed them all. She showed them the hollow, explained the principles, answered their questions with patience and grace. I started with nothing, she would say, nothing but a brother and a vow and a determination not to give up. Look at what nothing can become when you refuse to quit. In 1978, researchers from UC Berkeley came to study the tree. They brought instruments that could measure temperature and humidity with precision Evangeline could never have imagined. They spent a week documenting everything. Their findings confirmed what Evangeline had known for 46 years. The interior maintained a stable temperature between 55 and 60 degrees year-round, regardless of outside conditions. The thermal mass system provided efficient heating with minimal fuel. The insulation methods were comparable to modern passive house construction. The principles used here, the lead researcher told Evangeline, are exactly what architects are trying to achieve today with advanced technology. You figured them out in 1932, with nothing but observation and necessity. The study was published in Scientific American under the title, The Treehouse That Defied Science. It brought a new wave of visitors, researchers, and architects and ordinary people who wanted to see for themselves what a desperate 18-year-old had built. Evangeline Whitmore Mercer died in her sleep on a warm night in August 1982. She was 68 years old. They found her in the cabin in the bed she shared with Silas, a peaceful expression on her face. The doctors said her heart had simply stopped, that she had gone without pain or struggle. More than 200 people came to her funeral. Many were descendants of the families she had sheltered during the storm of 1932. Many had been touched by her kindness, her wisdom, her willingness to help anyone who asked. She was buried beside copper, outside the entrance to the hollow tree. Silas chose the words for her headstone. Evangeline Whitmore Mercer, 1914 to 1982. She found shelter in a tree and became shelter for others. The tree still stands today. It is part of Humboldt Redwood State Park now, protected forever. Rangers lead tours to the site daily, telling the story of the Whitmore orphans to visitors from around the world. The hollow is empty now, cleared of the furnishings that Evangeline and Callum accumulated over 2 decades. But you can still see the marks they left, the places where they carved shelves into the wood, the smoke stains on the ceiling from thousands of fires, the worn spots on the floor where generations of feet walked the same paths. A small plaque near the entrance tells the story in brief. But the full story, the story you have just heard, lives on in the memories of those who knew it, in the records that were kept, in the simple truth of a tree that became a home. What Evangeline built in that tree was more than shelter. It was proof that home is not a place but a decision, not a structure but a commitment, not something you find but something you create. She had nothing when she entered that forest, nothing but a brother who needed her and a determination that would not bend. She emerged with a legacy that has inspired people for nearly a century. The lesson of Evangeline Whitmore's life is simple but easy to forget. When someone takes everything from you, they have not taken your ability to build again. When the world writes you off as lost, you are not obligated to accept its verdict. When you find yourself with nothing, standing in a forest with someone who depends on you and no idea how you will survive. Sometimes the answer is not to search for what you think you need, but to recognize what is already there, waiting to be transformed into something no one expected. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone standing at the edge of their own forest, wondering if they have what it takes. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week we tell stories of ordinary people who refuse to accept the limits others placed on them. I will see you in the next video, because somewhere out there right now, someone is discovering that nothing is enough.
Between the massive hollow redwood trunks, an 18-year-old girl in a worn black dress and gray coat, her brown hair tied low at the nape of her neck, quietly worked by the steady firelight, while a 16-year-old boy bent over adjusting tools near the stove. The interior was clean and tidy, the stone floor solid, the curved wooden walls covered in natural insulation. Every movement was